So one of the things we're trying to do this week with all these events, these lunchtime talks and the evenings as well, is we're trying to get you thinking a bit about what Christians believe. And particularly, hopefully, engage with some of the questions, the common questions that people have about Christianity and the idea of God and whether or not he's there. And we come today, I guess, to what I think is probably one of the biggest questions or objections that people have about the idea of God, the concept of a benevolent being in the sky. Suffering. If there is a good God, then why is there so much suffering? How can a good God that Christians claim to believe in exist in the face of all the suffering we see in the world? I don't know if that's a topic that particularly keeps you up at night. I think that is probably one of the biggest reasons today why people don't subscribe to religion or faith or the idea of God. And it's a topic which, I want to say at the beginning, great minds in history have wrestled with. Greater minds than ours, theologians, philosophers, scientists, literary artists and others. And so I sort of want to say at the beginning as a bit of a disclaimer, I'm not claiming to be able to give a comprehensive answer to this question in 20 minutes or whatever we've got. And the second thing I want to say, by way of kind of a disclaimer, is I'm aware that this is a topic which is not just an academic topic, is it, when it comes to each of us. This is a topic which I expect touches all of us in very different and often very deep and personal ways. As I talk about suffering today, I'm aware that in this room, lots of us will be thinking this isn't just an academic, technical question that needs answering. This is a question which you could rephrase, not just how can God allow suffering, but how can God allow suffering to me in whatever situations you might be facing? And I just want to say that at the beginning, because can I ask for kind of your grace when it comes to that? Please bear with me. I don't want to say anything that is meant to offend you or make you suffer more in terms of the particular struggles that you're dealing with. I don't claim to have all the answers when it comes to this topic of suffering. I don't actually think anyone can claim to have all the answers. But just because we can't say everything about suffering in the world, I don't think it means that we therefore can't say something. And what I'd like to do is, just in the minutes we've got, present to you three things which I think start to give the Christian answer to this very good question. How can a good God allow suffering? And the first thing I'd like to say is this. Suffering, I think, shows us that there's something wrong with the world, doesn't it? Suffering shows us that there's something wrong with the world. The logic tends to go like this. This is the logic of our objection. If there really is a good God, if there really is an all-powerful, loving being who made us, who wants to know us, and that's what Christians claim, then how can there be so much suffering in the world? Doesn't the presence of suffering in the world immediately count as evidence against God existing at all? Because, if God is good, then why doesn't he do something about it? Or perhaps, therefore, God just can't do something about it. Maybe he's impotent, and therefore maybe he's not really God. And the first thing that tells me, and I don't know if you would agree with this, it tells me that there's an assumption built into that criticism, isn't there? It assumes suffering is a problem in the world. That might sound so obvious that you might think, well, yeah, of course, that's not rocket science. But what I want to say is the issue of suffering, in that sense, how to explain it, it's not an issue that only Christians or people who believe in God have to face and answer, is it? It's an issue that faces you, whatever religion you subscribe to, whatever philosophy guides you through life, whatever worldview you approach every day with. It demands an explanation, doesn't it? Where does suffering come from? Whether you're a Christian or an atheist or a Muslim or a Jew or a Hindu, Buddhist, whatever, on what basis do you affirm that suffering is a problem in the world? Let me give an example. One of the more famous sort of outspoken atheists of our time is, of course, Richard Dawkins. And he's quite blunt often in expressing how his atheism deals with the question of evil and suffering. Here's a quote from one of his books. It's quite a famous quote. He says this: "In a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replications, some people are going to get lucky, some people are going to get hurt. And we won't find any rhyme or reason to it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good." See what he says in explaining the apparent presence of suffering and evil and right and wrong in the world. He believes in a world, he says very honestly, without ultimate purpose, A world without ultimate meaning, a world without God. But he says, therefore, in that kind of world, if that's the way reality actually is, then you struggle to objectively object to something like suffering, don't you? He says, the logical conclusion, and I have to admire his kind of consistency here, the logical conclusion of getting rid of God in a meaningless universe, in the face of struggle and suffering, you can't actually say things are wrong and that they shouldn't be. You just have to say, that's the way things are, suck it up. That's life, isn't it? In a world of blind physical forces. Some people win, some people lose. The logical conclusion is that evil and suffering are just relative experiences on this view of the world. It might feel wrong for us, it might hurt us, it might cause us pain, it might offend our sensitivities. But actually, on what basis do we affirm it's wrong? It's a point that's picked up by probably, arguably, the leading philosopher in America today, a guy called Alvin Plantinga. He says it like this: if you think there really is such a thing as horrifying wickedness, then you have a powerful argument for the reality of God. Could there really be any such thing as horrifying wickedness if there were no God? I don't see how, he says. There can only be such a thing if there is a way rational creatures are supposed to and obliged to live. And I want to sort of say, don't mishear what he's saying now. Don't mishear what I'm saying. He's not saying if you're an atheist or if you're a humanist, if you don't believe in God, he's not saying you can't care about evil and suffering. He's not saying that at all. What he's saying is, if you're going to be logically consistent, you can't just insert meaning and value and morality if you hold a view of the world which says there isn't ultimately any meaning or value or morality. In the face of the question of suffering, the first thing we naturally want to do, and it is a very natural response, isn't it? We want to get rid of the idea of God. And I want to say first and foremost, that doesn't actually solve the problem of evil and suffering, does it? In fact, it makes it worse because, well then, to whom are we addressing the question? You don't have to look far, do you, in the news to look at the suffering in our world. Plane crashes, countries tearing themselves apart, civil wars like in Syria, now in the Ukraine. Just even around our own society here in the UK, people dying, people struggling with illness, disease. Even just in the last few weeks, 21 Egyptians beheaded on a beach in Libya. And that's before we consider just our own personal sufferings, isn't it? Loneliness, depression, stress, heartbreak, disappointment, failure, sickness, sadness, take your pick. We all suffer to some extent. And when suffering breaks in, it makes us want to cry out, doesn't it? This should not be. There must be a place we can go. There must be a court we can appeal to, isn't there? Shouldn't there be an objective standard about which and by which we can say, that's wrong, the world shouldn't be like that. It should be a better place. We're not happy, I would argue, with what Dawkins is saying, if we really ask ourselves that it's just the way life is. Suck it up. Suffering shows us there's something wrong with the world, isn't there? But that doesn't get us very far, does it? Because that doesn't actually explain, therefore, if suffering is really real, how can it exist alongside a God that Christians claim is good and powerful? How can those two things be compatible, we might ask? Eddie Izzard is one of my sort of favourite comedians. I sort of grew up watching Eddie Izzard, and I'm a big fan of his. I don't know if you listen to him much or have seen him do stand-up. But he's sort of quite an outspoken atheist as well. And he once said, kind of slightly jokingly, if God's there, doesn't he have a lot of questions to answer? Don't you think he might have popped down and flicked Hitler's head off? Do you see what he's saying? He's saying, you can't believe in a God who wouldn't have got involved and done something about all the injustices and suffering that we see in the world. God's silence, he's saying, is evidence that he's not there. But what he's basically saying is, God doesn't act when it comes to suffering in the way that I think he should in order to sort it out. And so that's my second point in terms of the Christian answer to suffering in the world. Suffering shows us not only there's something wrong with the world, suffering shows us there's something wrong with us, I think, as people. We're confident, aren't we, as people, that we can always diagnose problems and sort out solutions. I'll give you a silly example. If my car breaks down, I'm always super confident. I do what any self-respecting bloke does. I pull to the side of the road and I open the bonnet. And I stand there. You see, I might pretend to know what I'm looking for, but I don't understand the mechanics of my car. There's an awful lot going on that I don't know, not least not how to just diagnose the problem, but certainly not how to fix it. And in a much more serious way, when it comes to suffering and evil in the world, like Eliezer, we're very quick, aren't we, to say what God would need to do to sort out suffering, that we can diagnose the problem and therefore diagnose a solution. God's got a lot of explaining to do. But what I want to say is, when you stop to think about it, what would God have to do to solve the problem of suffering in the world? We think we suffer for lots of different ways, don't we? And all kinds of things cause suffering in the world. We live in a world where people drown in tidal waves and lakes and rivers. So should God maybe just get rid of all water to stop suffering? Well, no, we live in a world where we need water to exist. We digest food because of the bacteria in our stomachs, but the same type of bacteria cause diseases and suffering and illness. Our bodies are weak and frail. They need to replicate and grow, and yet that same thing causes disease and eventually death. We suffer on one level just by the fact that we are free living creatures. And I just want to say that demanding that God kind of clicks his fingers and sorts out suffering is not a simple process, I think we have to acknowledge. And that's before we get to the problem of human evil and suffering, isn't it? We've just finished, critics say, arguably the most murderous century in the history of humanity, the 20th century. An estimated 100 to 150 million people were killed in war in the 20th century. 100 million in political oppression, another 100 million through ethnic cleansing. Ambrose Bierce, the American novelist, he said this. He said, the defining feature of humanity is inhumanity. And the question of suffering is not only a question about what does it say about God, isn't it a question about what does it say about us as people? If God was there, what would he actually have to do to get rid of suffering, do you think? For a start, he'd have to get rid of evil people, wouldn't he? According to Eliezer. People who cause holocausts, people who cause wars, people who behead prisoners on beaches in Libya. Surely he'd want to get rid of evil people who abuse children, rapists, murderers. But if we're really serious, he couldn't stop there, could he? He'd have to get rid of corrupt governments. He'd have to get rid of greedy politicians, regimes, bankruptcy in terms of human rule. He'd have to get rid of greedy people too, wouldn't he? People who dodge their taxes. He'd have to get rid of people who cheat on their wives, people who cheat on their boyfriends, people who are two-faced, people who speak about other people behind their backs. If we're really serious about him getting rid of suffering, people who hurt each other with the things they do and say, people who are selfish, people who can be rude. Just see where I'm going. We might cry out that God should get rid of the people who cause suffering, but it's not very long, is it, before we start to feel a little bit uncomfortable, if we're honest. Where does God have to stop in getting rid of suffering? A couple of disclaimers. I'm not saying that lying to your girlfriend is the same as murdering people. And I'm not saying that all of us are all bad all of the time. I'm simply saying when we demand that God sorts out suffering, what are we asking and what kind of solution are we expecting? Suffering is not just over there, is it? Most of the time, even in small ways, we're responsible for how we treat each other. Jarvis Cocker is the lead singer from a band called Pulp. I listened to a lot of Pulp growing up. And he's written a really interesting song, I think, called Auschwitz to Ipswich. And it's slightly odd, but he says this in it. He says, it's the same. Why don't you admit it? It's the same from Auschwitz to Ipswich. Evil comes, I know not from where, but if you take a look inside yourself, you might find some in there. See, part of the Christian answer to suffering is that suffering alerts us to the fact that the world's not the place it should be, and actually, if we're honest, we're not the people we should be, are we? If part of the answer to getting rid of suffering would be getting rid of the people who cause suffering, then we should be asking, well, why hasn't God, if he's there, done that yet? I don't know where you're at in your thinking about God. You may have come to lots of these events. You may have thought about this a lot. This may be the first thing you've come to. Maybe you're not even convinced God's there. But just imagine he is there. Imagine he's totally good. He's the source of all goodness in the world. Which, if you think about it, is what you're assuming if you demand that God sorts out suffering. Well, then isn't it true that ignoring God in the world that he's made would have disastrous consequences, wouldn't it, in terms of suffering? It's interesting, we're very quick to point the finger at God when it comes to suffering in the world, aren't we? And yet, don't we just as easily ignore him when things go well in the world or in our lives? We're happy to let suffering mount up over here as evidence against God, but how often do we consider that happiness or fulfillment or success or satisfaction might be things that we should thank God for? Part of the answer, and it's not the full answer, but part of the Christian answer to suffering is to point the finger back at us and say the reason the world is not the place it should be is that we're not the people we should be. As the human race, as creatures, we've turned away from the God who made us, and that we ignore him in the world he's made. Again, a slight sort of disclaimer. Christianity doesn't say that individuals suffer simply because they are individually rebelling against God. You know, it's not like yin and yang. It's not like karma. It's not like God is arbitrarily just punishing individuals because of things that they've done. That's not the Christian answer to suffering. But it is that we inhabit a world of suffering and pain because we inhabit a world where God gives us the dignity and the disaster of choosing to live ignoring him. God doesn't make us as robots. We are free to choose how to live. We're free to choose living in his world, rejecting him. But that exposes us to the reality of a world where we all suffer to varying degrees, don't we? In various ways. And I want to say as well, this isn't just a technical question, is it? But there is actually no logical inconsistency with God being all good and all powerful, because there's a third option. What if God is all powerful? What if he is all good? But what if there's a good reason why he doesn't just click his fingers right now and sort out suffering? In fact, if you've got a God in your mind that you maybe do or don't believe in, who's big enough that you're mad at him because of the suffering in the world, then isn't he also, by same definition, big enough to have good reasons for how he deals with suffering, even if we're not able to know them? Part of the Christian answer is that suffering is kind of like a wake-up call. It should sober us up. It shouts at us, things aren't right between you and God. And this leads on to the final thing I'd like to say before. I'd love to have your questions and comments on this. Jesus, the person at the centre of Christianity, shows us that God is prepared to suffer in order to deal with suffering. Every religion, every philosophy, every worldview has an answer, a solution that it claims to be the solution to suffering. So, for example, Eastern religions like Buddhism, they will tell you that suffering is kind of an illusion. It's kind of the product of our desires. And when we wake up to the fact that it doesn't really exist, we can live in sort of nirvana. Something like Hinduism will tell you that it's about karma. If you do good things, you'll be reincarnated as something better. If you do bad things, life will get worse. Even non-religious worldviews, even something like atheistic humanism, it's on a quest, isn't it, to create a kind of secular utopia free from all the things that cause suffering, like religion. Jesus actually gives us a radically different answer to the problem of suffering. When you look at the person of Jesus, when you actually consider the eyewitness accounts of his life, he's not someone who's uninterested in suffering. He's someone who blessed needy children. He associated himself with the down and outs. He healed sick people. He went to the people on the outskirts of society, the outcasts, the prostitutes, the bad people who caused and experienced all kinds of suffering. Jesus is someone who would have wept with the victims of 9/11. He would have stood with the prisoners in North Korea. Jesus claims to show us a God who is so intimately involved and committed to us that he doesn't just leave us in the mess we've made of his world. He comes and he walks among us. He identifies with us. He actually suffers as a person alongside us. When you read the accounts of Jesus' life, you see that, in fact, he had one goal in his life, which was to go to a place of ultimate suffering, to be killed in a horrific way on a Roman cross. That's the claim, which is completely unique to Christianity, actually. The God we meet in Jesus has himself suffered. He's a God who has wounds, which show he's not ambivalent or uncaring in the face of suffering. He cared enough to suffer the consequences of our broken relationship with him. That's why Christians talk about the cross being the centre of all that Jesus did. Because on the cross, Jesus suffers actually what we deserve for the way we've treated God. We want to cry out, where is God in the face of suffering? And part of the Christian answer is that God, 2,000 years ago, was on a Roman cross, suffering for people like you and me. No other religious philosophy has such an extreme and radical approach to suffering. A God who's prepared to get his hands dirty. A God who's prepared to step into the mess we've made. And the result of that, and you might want to come back at me with questions or come to things later in the week, the result of that is that God claims to provide a solution in the long term to suffering. We all long for the world to be a better place. We've already said that. That's not a kind of pie-in-the-sky thing. More than half the people in the UK today believe in some kind of heaven or future or life after death. And the Bible promises, actually, that heaven is real. That it's this real world made right. All the great things that we enjoy now, but with none of the suffering or heartache or pain. And so the Christian approach to suffering, while it doesn't explain every individual instance, is a view which does provide genuine hope in the face of suffering. Hope in the face of life's struggles. And confidence that this world isn't it, and God hasn't abandoned it. It's not out of control, but that God knows what he's doing. And a promise of a future free from struggle and suffering. As I said at the beginning, I don't have all the answers to specific suffering. But in the person of Jesus, we do have a demonstration of a God who is good and cares deeply about suffering.